Welcome to ACC Nation. I'm Jim Quist, that's Will Ogenin, and we're talking ACC sports. Our special guest is the publisher of TarHeelIllustrated, Andrew Jones, is going to talk to us about North Carolina men's basketball and some other items that you don't want to miss out on. Andrew, thanks for joining us. We welcome you to ACC Nation.
My pleasure being on. It's nice to see your backdrop in Richmond, beautiful home state of Virginia of mine. So anytime I get a chance to dip my toes in the old VA, I'm very happy to do so.
So I want to start by recapping what the week that was for UNC basketball, and it was very down and very up. So I guess we should start with the negative, and that I would call it a strange loss to Marquette. So put it in simple terms, what happened?
Well, I think you have to go back to Louisville to kind of understand Marquette and then to understand Florida State. They were phenomenal against a Louisville team that was certainly ripe for the picking, considering the fact they hadn't played in 19 days. They'd only practiced 7 times in that time span because they were in a second COVID pause. And Louisville didn't handle their first COVID pause well. They came out, got blown out at Wisconsin. So what did they do in their second one? They got blown out in North Carolina. That said, North Carolina played phenomenally well. The freshmen had a stretch where they scored a ton of points, consecutive points. It was 34 consecutive points in that game, and they were just outstanding. They did the kinds of things more consistently for those 40 minutes than they had earlier in the season in most games, and that's kind of been an issue. I think when you talk to Roy Williams about, I asked him a question the other day, you've had teams before in the past, you kind of woke up on game day and had an idea. This guy was going to give you this, that guy was going to give you that, and that guy was going to give you something else. With this team, he doesn't know. From one game to the next, it's a guy might flare up or a guy might have a bad game. But they actually have those stretches in the middle of games where they play well for 8 minutes and then they're awful for 8 minutes. So in the Louisville game, they played really well for 40 minutes. So the key for them the mantra was, can you connect a well-played game to another well-played game, which would be a sign of growth for a young team. And they didn't do it. Roy said that they didn't handle prosperity well. I think they think that there was more value from the Louisville win than there really was. And we qualified it very clearly. Hey, these guys are good coming off COVID pause. Most teams are not. Look at Baylor here a couple of days ago. So you got to take it with a grain of salt, even though they did a lot of things well. Well, they weren't ready to play Marquette. They never got ready to play Marquette. Roy tried to press some, tried to do things to infuse them with some energy. It didn't work, and they lost, and they learned a lesson. So then they turn around and they're at home, and they have Florida State coming in, and on paper, given what I've seen this year, there's no way that they should beat Florida State. Then they're down 16, and you figure, okay, at halftime, some of the media were talking about these guys aren't going to the NCAA tournament. Maybe Carolina and Duke both won't go to the NCAA tournament. And Walker Kessler just exploded, and he gave the team a ton of energy. Then the crowd that was there, I think that the buzz that was in the building started to actually be an asset. And they somehow managed to win that game. They played exceptionally well in the second half. They played mature basketball. And that's kind of what you get with this young team. You get Louisville, you get Marquette, and you get Florida State. And against Florida State, they had both Louisville and Marquette kind of wrapped up in the same 40 minutes.
Well, you mentioned Walker Kessler, and he's not been one to see a lot of playing time throughout the season, but he really stepped up huge for Carolina, and I would say he was the reason they won that game. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think there are 3 reasons they won that game. Number one, in no particular order, Kessler, because he gave them life. He gave them energy. They were playing hard in the first half, but I think the fact that there were people in the building, and there was a tremendous buzz in there yesterday. They only had 3,200 people, and there's a 21,750 seat building. So I've seen it full many, many, many times. But there was great energy, especially compared to what these kids have been used to. They have a bunch of freshmen. They hadn't played in front of anybody at home yet. So I think they were a little amped up in the first half, and they were maybe pressing too hard, trying too hard. Caleb Love tried to dunk where he left from just outside the free throw lane, and it was really not a smart play, but that was kind of an example of being a little too amped up. But when Walker started playing really well and just did his thing, I think it relaxed the players, and they just kind of grabbed onto him and rode him, and then they all ended up playing well. The other thing was defensively. They were much better defensively in the second half. They did not stop the dribble drive to save their life in the first half, but they started to in the second half, and one of the reasons why, because they had Walker Kessler. They had a rim protector behind him. And the other thing is I think that they just kind of got composed. You see with a young team, little increments of growth, increments of maturity. And I think we saw that during the course of the game Saturday.
We've talked about a lot about the freshmen on this team, and I want to throw another one that we've yet to mention. And as someone who lives in Minnesota, loves to see people succeed, and that's Kerwin Walt, who was the lowest ranked recruit from this 2020 class. But he is, as the way he's played this season, he's been every bit as important to the other guys, hasn't he?
There's no doubt. In fact, if you go back to the turning point for this team, when they actually started to steer the nose in the right direction of figuring some things out, it was when Roy instilled him in the starting lineup for the Georgia Tech game. He kind of shook the tree before that game, made some changes. They needed someone who could knock down shots. He knocked down a few in their win over Kentucky and Cleveland, but he still came off the bench in the next game at NC State. They struggled and lost that game. Roy blitzkrieged the team publicly about their defense and some other things. So he made the change going to Atlanta, and Kerwin has given them that threat. In fact, what's interesting lately is teams are taking him. They realize that there are times he's the only dude that can on that team that can hit an outside shot in some games. So teams are going out and playing out on him a lot more. Louisville did it a lot, and he put the ball on the floor a couple of times and was starting to create some shots of his own. In fact, he had 9 free throw attempts up to the Louisville game. I think he's got 6 since then. So it's not a lot of free throws, but if you look at the percentages from games played and minutes played, he's starting to pick it up more because he has to use the dribble. So he's given them a threat that teams need to respect. And I think that's kind of helped the inside. The entry lanes are there a little bit more. Teams don't drop that wing defender down as quickly to double the post when the ball goes on the block. And I think that as Kerwin gets more experienced and gets better at using the dribble and gets better at sometimes getting a defender on his hip and getting a shot off in the lane, it's going to open up even more stuff for them.
One thing, I wanted to go back to the Florida State game for a moment. And I kind of forgot about this beforehand, but the free throw shooting has been kind of a bugaboo of this team all season, but it really was really good in this game. What is there anything that you've seen that could reasonably say this team, could do this?
No, in fact, there are two sides to that story from yesterday. Is the fact that FSU is the best free throw shooting team in the league. That program's always been sensational under Leonard Hamilton shooting free throws. They were like 4 of 12 or something, 4 of 11 in the second half. So a team that's terrible shooting free throws hit a bunch. They hit all 14 in the second half. And the other team that's really good at hitting them. In fact, I think they were 26 of 27 against Carolina and Tallahassee. They struggled. That happens in college basketball. That happens with young teams. Roy's been asked about free throw shooting a lot in the last couple of weeks because they went through about an 8-game stretch where they shot about 53%. That's abysmal. It's abysmal. Whether you're young or not, that's abysmal. But they did make him yesterday. And Roy's like, we're shooting 300 in practice. And if they don't make a certain percentage, they got to run. They're trying all those tricks. And, with young kids, you just never know when it's going to click. And it did click for them Saturday. But it wouldn't surprise anybody if they go 10 for 20 at Syracuse.
Roy's had some frustrating seasons, to say the least. And I just give me your impression, because you're dealing with this close up on a regular basis. Tell us what your thoughts about, what's the root cause of this frustration, and how do you think he's going to dig his way out of this?
Well, I think he is digging his way out of it. A big part of the issue with where people see North Carolina basketball right now is they had that NCAA cloud, that stuff that was going on, and it made recruiting really difficult. Roy used to famously tell stories about how, in the X number of years before the cloud is what he calls it, or the crap or the stuff, the junk, he got 25 McDonald's All-Americans on campus to visit over a certain number of years. And then during the course of the cloud, he got like 2. So if you look at their roster and you look at the 4 non-freshmen who play, Garrison Brooks was the number 123 player in the class. Andrew Platek was not in the top 50 for rivals. Leaky Black was number 81. And then Armando Bacot was a McDonald's All-American, but he's a sophomore. And he's a sophomore who admittedly was immature last year and is still in the maturing process. So then you got a bunch of freshmen. And they don't really have your typical older classic Carolina fanny smacker kind of guy. They don't have that on the roster right now. So I think in some respects, Roy kind of had to hit a reset button on the program. He navigated through that stuff very well. He played in a title game, won a title game. And then with the Luke May group and Kenny Williams and Cam Johnson, they were a 1 seed and a 2 seed back-to-back years. And I guess in North Carolina, if you're not a 2 seed, it's a bad year. So last year they had to patch it together with some grad transfers. It didn't really pan out. And right now they got a bunch of young kids. But I do think if you look at the freshman class, they look like a North Carolina freshman class. They're just being asked to do a lot more than classes normally have been. The last freshman class that was asked to do this much was the Tyler Hansbrough group. And Tyler Hansbrough is the most productive and successful North Carolina player of all time as a collegiate. And he also had Bobby Frazier, a coach's son at the point. He had Danny Green. He's kind of gone on to do pretty well for himself. This group, we don't know what they're going to become, but they don't have that Hansbrough-esque kind of guy as a freshman. Now, Kessler kind of did a little rendition of it Saturday, but that's just one day, and that was just one half. He only played 24 minutes. That wasn't Hansbrough-esque in the full scheme of things. So Roy's kind of building this thing, I'm not going to say from scratch, because the culture is still there and the standard is still there, and these kids talk about that a lot. And sometimes that's a heavy weight for a young kid, especially a lot of them when they're so inconsistent. But I think that he is working his way out of it. This club probably going to lose one player to the draft early, and I think Daron Sharp probably would be surprised if he's back. Otherwise, the rest of those kids are going to be back. They have a chance to be really, really good next year and very quickly be back to what is considered typical North Carolina.
I appreciate you explaining this in detail, because I know that people who are outside of that Tar Heel bubble in other media, other fan groups, et cetera, are looking at North Carolina and going, well, that's the end of that reign of terror from that blue blood. But this explains things in such detail and makes so much sense as to why there has been this, we'll call it a lull, because that's basically what it is. And most teams have some form of a lull somewhere in history. Duke's going through one too. So now you talk about these freshmen and the potential, and this is a team, I think, next year, and I think you hit it right on the head, so I want you to elaborate a little bit more. You talk about only one player possibly going in the draft, and then all these other folks coming back. That's a team to really be afraid of, because if they hit their stride and their potential, Roy Williams has a winner on his hands.
Well, let me give you an example. Walker Kessler likely will be ACC Freshman of the Week, and if he gets it, he'll be the 5th different freshman to earn the honor this year. So what that tells you is that that's the flare-up I was talking about. These kids will flare up for a week, and then they come back down. So the good thing about flare-up is that they can go to that level, and they can play that well, and they can do it for multiple games. The key is to get consistent and do it more often. So their mission in the offseason would be to refine 3 or 4 elements of each one of their games that will help them get to where they're consistent. So, when the week that RJ Davis was ACC Freshman of the Week, he's got to find that guy, clean up some of the stuff, and become that guy more on a regular basis. Same with Caleb Love, same with Walker Kessler, and so on. So, and Kerwin Walt, he was just ACC Freshman of the Week last week. So they have that, but as growth being what it is and young guys being what it is, they're going to have to put in the work in the off season. If things open up a little bit more, one of the things that really helps players when they get to North Carolina is in the summer, the pros come back. All these Carolina guys that are playing overseas, that are playing in the NBA, some that are even retired, 38-year-old men that can still get up and down the floor, they come back and they play. And that will help Caleb Love a lot, because one of the things he kind of struggles with, he's learning how to play point guard this year. He's never played it before. So one of the things he struggles with is the two-man stuff, and that's what he's going to have to learn how to do when he goes to the NBA, right? If he's got a big man screen to set a ball screen for him, then he rolls. Caleb's got to know that the roll's there. He's got to feed him. He misses that a lot. In the off season, they'll do that constantly in the pickup that they play, and that'll be something that he'll improve on just simply by playing the pros. So if they have that opportunity and things do open up, and those guys are back in Chapel Hill, that alone will take care of some of it. They'll all get better just by playing those dudes. And then if they can work on the 3 or 4 things that Roy tells them, you must get better at this in the offseason when he has that end of season meeting with each player, then they have a chance to be really good next year. I won't project it until I see it. I'm not a fan of projecting something to happen unless I've kind of seen it or seen a hint of it happening. So they still have a few more games left. I have no idea how they're going to close this thing out. My guess is they're just going to wobble around like they've been doing for the last 3 months. And maybe they catch fire in March. Maybe they go out the first game in March. Who the heck knows? But whatever happens here, I think we'll figure in a way a lot of people sort of perceive them going into the offseason. I'm going to look at the bigger picture. I'm going to look at the bigger picture that these guys have all had flare-ups, and they've all been really bad at times. And that's going to be dealt with in the offseason. And if they can make 15 to 25% improvement in their games, then they have a chance to be outstanding next year.
Since you said you don't want to do any projections at the moment, I won't touch on bracketology. So
no, I mean, I'm okay with that. I'm talking more big picture next year type thing.
Yeah.
Because until I see what they look like next fall, it's going to be really hard to say, hey, this club's going to go 28-6
right
when they're coming off a 19-11 or 18-11 season. It's hard to project unless you have seen hints of that. And so far, they've only given us a few snapshots. They've mostly been above mediocre this year. They were really good against Louisville. They were really good in the second half against Florida State. But that's not the norm. They were really bad against Marquette. I think who they are is somewhere in between and just kind of bouncing around from one 4-minute stretch to the next 4-minute stretch.
This is a glass half full, half empty scenario that
it really is.
We'll wait to see.
And I think Roy looks at it half empty because he's never satisfied. And that's actually good because they don't have great leadership, and he kind of needs to be the leader. So keeping that, not changing his tune. Some coaches, when they get young teams, I've covered coaches, when they get young teams, they're kind of tender with them, and they don't criticize much. They don't push as hard because they don't know how they're going to respond to it. I think Roy has gotten to the point with this group where he's Roy now, and he's doing things the Roy way. And I think that they're starting to respond to it, which is a good sign that that's happening before next season. So it's not culture shock to him when real Roy shows up next season, when the expectations are very high.
I like the real Roy shows up. That's good. And that hits it on the head. Let me talk about stats for a second, because this is a part that I'm just going to touch a little bit on it because there's a lot of areas here that I'd kind of like to get into. Here's the thing that boggles my mind. There is not one player on this team that is in the top 20 of ACC scoring. My mind just is gone. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, and they're really good in some other areas, but that one in particular, considering where they are and the potential for where they could be, to follow your line of thinking, what's that all about?
Well, a little insight into multiple conversations I've had on press row the last couple of weeks. Go to any person on press row whom you respect. Ask them the question, who's their best player? If the season ended today, who would be their MVP? You get dumbfounded looks. Nobody has a clue. Because that goes back to the question I asked Roy last Friday about every team you've ever had before. You had guys you knew what you were going to get. He could get a superstar one night and a guy that plays 12 minutes, 4 fouls, and doesn't score the next night. That kind of explains it. They are unbelievably inconsistent as individuals, and when they're all like that as individuals, it's easy to understand why they're like that as a team. And there are some nights where 3 or 4 guys have really good games. There are some nights where only one has really good. Against Marquette, the oldest guy, Garrison Brooks, who was a preseason ACC Player of the Year, but has only played about 5 games this year like he did a year ago. He was actually excellent Wednesday night, but he couldn't bring anybody with him. And the rest of the guys were pretty bad, and they lost to a bad team by 13 points at home, and which was really a must-win kind of game. They needed that badly. So that explains that. Armando Bacot was probably their best player in the early mid-January, and then in the last couple of games, I don't know the exact stats, but he had played 13 minutes against Marquette and struggled big time. He struggled against Florida State. In fact, that's the reason Walker Kessler was out there. He started the second half because Bacot was struggling so much. So the guy that you thought maybe was their best player a month ago didn't even start the second half in the most important game of the year because he was having not just a poor game, but a poor stretch of games.
We talked about Garrison Brooks and him, he was preseason ACC player of the year, and obviously he has not quite met those expectations. Has he just been one of those players that, like you said, has just been inconsistent all season, or is there something else?
Well, yeah, he's been inconsistent. A lot of people have tried to explain or rationalize why he has been. I mean, he averaged the last 19 games of last season, he averaged about 18.9, 19 points a game and about 8.5 rebounds. He shot about 56% from the floor. And he looked like a guy that, he could actually go somewhere and make money professionally playing this sport. Maybe not in the NBA, but maybe somewhere in Europe where he can make some pretty good coin, like a Deion Thompson, who was on the 2009 title team, has done very well over in Europe. But he's only had about 5 or 6 games that were reminiscent of last year. And I think one of the issues is last year, they only had one other big, and that was Bacot. And Bacot was in foul trouble, and he struggled a lot. He had some injury issues, and he only averaged about 23 minutes a game. So you got to figure that he was on the court when Garrison wasn't, and Garrison was at about 33 minutes a game. So that's about 16 minutes a night. Garrison and Bacot at the most were on the floor together. The rest of the time, it was Justin Pierce, who was a 6'7" transfer from William and Mary, who was a perimeter player. So when Garrison got the ball a lot in the paint, it was just his defender. There was nobody else there. There was no help side defense. They would have to drop a guy from the wing to defend him. This year, there's always two post guys on the floor. So when Garrison gets the ball and tries to make a move and turns to his left or turns to his right, the other defender's right there. It's more crowded now. And he's not so explosive where he can go through a guy. He doesn't play much above the rim. He has to use a finesse game in the lane. And if there's a bunch of people in the lane, it's a lot harder to have success with that than if there's just one guy to beat. And I think that's probably the best explanation. Otherwise, it's kind of, I think that he's had to deal with it. I think there was a stretch during the season maybe where Garrison was trying to sort through it, and that was affecting his game. I mean, it's human nature. We all have gone through stretches in life where suddenly something's not going the way we thought it would go and planned on it going, and we kind of have to readjust. And I think Garrison was having to do that midstream. That Georgia Tech game I alluded to about when Kerwin Walt started, Garrison didn't. He was actually, he and Leaky Black, who's the other most experienced guy on the team, they didn't start that night. Roy really shook the tree. And Garrison, after the game, said that it hurt. Day'Ron Sharp started in his place. He said it hurt that a freshman started in my place. So he had to come to terms with that. And I do think that his floor game has been better in recent weeks. And that's a sign that Garrison's, in the right place where he needs to be. But as far as production goes, if they get more than 10 points a game from him, it's probably a really productive night, because I don't think that they can really plan on getting more than that most nights when he takes the floor.
As someone who watches ACC basketball a lot, obviously, but doesn't understand a lot of the intricacies of how coaches run run things, can you explain to me why these UNC teams are always so good at offensive rebounds?
Well, it's Roy, I've heard him say 1,000 times, it's the most important stat, rebounding. To him, that number one statistic is rebounding. Then offensive rebounding, which you do, every time you get an offensive rebound, it takes away some pressure to get a defensive stop, because you're giving yourself an extra possession, an extra scoring opportunity. And he also always has big teams. Rarely does he not have 3 guys who are in the 6'9", 6'10" range that can play. He's got 4 of them this year. And he puts an emphasis on rebounding from the guard spots. That's one area they don't do very well this year. Caleb Love and RJ Davis don't rebound like Joel Berry did. Joel Berry was going to get you 4.5 a game, get you some physical boards. You rip and run and get it up the court. They don't do that as well as past Carolina teams, but their bigs are phenomenal. They play volleyball around the rim a lot. And that was a Dean Smith thing, and that's a Royce Kansas teams were like that. So it is the mission. If you were to tell those kids, okay, you're going to the game, doesn't matter whether you're playing North Carolina Central or whether you're playing Duke, what's the number one point of emphasis tonight? They will always tell you rebounding 1A and offensive rebounding 1B.
That they are doing too. Sharp is number 1 in the ACC on offensive rebounds, and Bacot is number 5. When it comes down to rebounding, also, Sharp, Bacot, Brooks, right up there in the top. And it always amazes me again when I look at these stats. I see things that throws a big question mark up in my head. I see that powerhouse of owning the boards, man, and that is, like you said, that is a staple, a trademark of UNC, and it always has been, and it's something I expect. But I the frustration comes into play here, not seeing it translating into something. But then I dig a little deeper, and then I start looking at scoring offense. North Carolina's at number 5. Though we don't have, as I mentioned earlier, we don't have anyone in the top 20. But the team is delivering. Their scoring defense is number 5. Scoring margin is number 5 in the conference. And assists, number 3. Steals, number 6. Block shots, number 5. So they're doing something right. I mean, you look at these stats and you dig into them, you see that this team is accomplishing something. And then I go back to your statement about all these young players coming back. And I'm going to push you a little bit here, Andrew.
That's fine.
So the projection here is that, you're alluding to this team has the potential. Let's take you down this path. Rather than projecting that they're going to have a 28-6 season, tell me what kind of success that you see, and in what area do you see them succeeding?
That's a good question, because their greatest weakness right now is guard play. And, Caleb Love, when he arrived, a lot of people assumed he was one and done. Well, in the last 15 games, going back to when Kerwin Walt was installed in the starting lineup, he's only been in double figures 4 times. The last time was when he exploded at Duke for 25. In fact, he was 9 of 16 that night, 4 of 5 from the 3, and he had 25 points at Duke. Since then, he hasn't been in double figures. He's 11 for 44 from the field and 1 for 17 from three-point range, and his turnovers are back up. He had 6 turnovers against Florida State. So his assist to turnover ratio is about even right now. His shooting percentage is poor. He's trying to learn how to manage the game, manage a team. He'd never played point guard before. He was one of those kids in high school that got the ball and did whatever he wanted. And even in AAU, he was so talented, whatever he wanted, but the kids in AAU weren't defending. There was no help defense in AAU. There was no big rolling over and smacking your stuff near the rim. But he still goes into the lane, not as nearly as often as he did earlier in the year, where you're like, yeah, he's trying to make one of those plays that he made for his entire life until he got here. And he's just got to get another reminder that doesn't really work. Something else, you got to try something else. So he's trying to learn how to play point guard, which is a demanding position for Roy Williams. Not only do you run the offense, you got to set the defense. And he actually has improved as a defensive player. His on-ball defense is pretty good. But there's just so much going on that at times it looks like his head is spinning. Not as much as before, but the production's not there. So when you look ahead to next year, the guards have to get better. Caleb Love has to have a phenomenal offseason. The pros have got to come back, and they got to run him ragged. They got to make him get better. They got to punk him every day and see how he responds. Because I've talked to Carolina players in the past that talk about that summer. There was a summer in their career that changed them. When the pros will come back and they'll knock your butt to the ground every time. They will show no sympathy. And when you get back up and start making them pay for it, that's when your game changes. That will be Caleb Love's mission this offseason. And I know that there's talk about him going pro, but he's on no boards anymore. He's not going to, it would be such a poor decision on his part. And I hope he doesn't do it, because I don't like seeing kids go early when they're not ready. And he would find himself in the G League, probably sitting on the bench if he did go, because he's just not ready. So another year, maybe so. Joel Berry was a freshman. A lot of people that covered that team for 3/4 of his freshman year they questioned whether he was an ACC player, because he was not exactly the Joel Berry we eventually saw. Well, Caleb Love's going to be a different player next year, and if he's around longer than that, he's going to be a much different player after that. What he's going through now should pay off. I have no reason to believe it won't because I've seen it happen a bunch of times. Coach K was asked about his team after the loss at home to Notre Dame a few weeks ago. He said, look, we're going to benefit from this. Whoever is still in this program is going to benefit from this experience because it's okay to be horrible sometimes. It's okay to have crap as long as you can learn from it and you can turn that into knowledge that helps you moving forward. I have a feeling that when Caleb Love is sitting around sometime in late April, early May, he's going to look back and say, wow, that was tough, but I learned a lot. And if he then takes that and improves his game as a result, I think he could be a really good player. But next year's team depends on him. It depends on R.J. Davis. It depends on if DeMarco Dunn could come in and hit shots in the perimeter, if he's a factor as a true freshman next year. How much better is Kerwin Walt using the dribble? Because if he's just a jump shooter, teams are going to figure him out. And if they don't have anybody else that can make shots, he's not going to be nearly the weapon that he can be if he adds more to his game. So a lot has to happen for them to be really good. I do think that the talent and potential is there. And having seen kids grow in this program before and grow in the Duke program, they're both very, very similar. I've covered both for years. That I have no reason to believe that these kids at least won't get better. How much better, I don't know, but they probably will get better.
The need to get punked is an apt term. And this is an apples to oranges comparison, but what made me a better coach was before I was seriously coaching, I got punked by a D1 woman guard who schooled me, who literally schooled me in a big way. And I never forgot that. And I took that into in high school level coaching and passed that along. And believe me, I'll never forget that.
Don't we all have those moments in whatever it is we do in life?
Yeah.
We all do.
Multiples.
Every one of us screws up, and we have that moment where like, oh, you want to find the biggest rock in the world and climb under and maybe reevaluate your life choices, right? Well, basketball players, the beautiful thing about it is it's just basketball.
Yeah. Yeah.
And guys like Caleb Love, he's got the natural gifts.
It's growth.
He's just got to apply, got to get better, got to figure some things out. And it's only 3 or 4 things, in my opinion, that would make him a much better player. There's a lot more for him to improve. But if you look at the incremental growth of the average college player, the typical college player, rather, 3 or 4 things a year by the time you're a senior, you're a darn good player. Now, he may not be around that long, but 3 or 4 things with him would make a big difference next year.
Enough to put him into that serious discussion of NBA. So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's look at 3 points here for just a minute. At number 9 in the ACC is Kerwin Walt, and it's somebody that Will had talked about earlier. And you talked about extensively about how when Kerwin is popping out, he's pulling a defense with him. Now, is there anybody else on this team that has the ability to do that, or that is coming in next season that has the ability to go out there and be that sort of a threat the same way that Kerwin Walton is?
Well, R.J. Davis was a prolific scorer in high school up in New York. And he came in with people thinking, okay, this guy's going to be able to get them some points. He does score points in bunches sometimes. And even Saturday, he had 1 assist and 5 turnovers, but he scored some points. And he did things that made the defense move to recognize where he was. So he was good enough to force the defense to be accountable for him. If he's more consistent doing that, he could play off of a guy like Caleb next year. Kerwin could play the 3. And there you go, you got some scoring out there on the court. But as you know, being around basketball, a lot of guys could shoot, but how many guys can consistently shoot? That's the key. And that's why you have flare-ups, and then you have poor games. I've seen a lot of, other than JJ Redick and a few other guys, I haven't seen a lot of dudes in college that are on every night, especially jump shooters. That's one reason Roy loves the post guys. It's a higher percentage shot from 3 feet out than it is from 15 or 20 feet out. And that's why his teams are always at 46, 47, 50% from the field, because so many of their shots are close to the basket. So that's the smart way to play the game. So the guys that are further away have a lower percentage, but it's being consistent with whatever you are, unless you're bad. You don't want to be consistently bad. That kind of is the key, and that's how you have really good teams. The clubs that I've covered that have won national titles, They had consistent outside shooting. Justin Jackson became a consistent outside shooter. They got to the title game at 16. He was better the next year. They won the national championship. He was ACC Player of the Year. Consistency is the key. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's everything in life, but certainly in basketball, because the inconsistent guy gives you what North Carolina's been this year.
So, Andrew, do you see UNC as a lock for the NCAA tournament at the moment?
There are a lot of people are saying that they are. I look at the NET. We do a daily NET report, and we follow all the teams that they played. A club like Stanford, for example, is doing them no favors because they were close to being top 50 in the NET, which would have been a Q1 win because it was a neutral site game. But they blow a lead at home to Oregon, then they lose at home to Oregon State. The reason I'm bringing that up is because I have no idea how the committee is going to evaluate things this year because it's such a different year. I mean, how do you evaluate Louisville's loss at Wisconsin or Louisville's loss last weekend, and then they go a week later to Duke and win? I mean, how do you evaluate that team? Because circumstances are so bizarre this season, and the NET formula makes no sense. Colgate was number 10 in the country a week ago. You put Colgate in the ACC, and Boston College is running them off the floor if they have more than 4 guys. So Wake Forest would run them off the floor on a regular basis. So the Q1 win number is something that's very important, but when the NET itself is flawed, how much stock can you put in the Q1? So I don't know how the committee's going to do this. So I would say they look like an NCAA tournament team a lot of the time, and there are times they don't look like an NCAA tournament team. But I think I watch a lot of college basketball, and other than about 12 teams, everybody else has nights where they don't look like they're anything close to an NCAA tournament team. So I would say probably the FSU win certainly gives them some breathing room, but they can't afford to lose at Syracuse and lose at home to Duke and then lose on Wednesday or Thursday of the ACC tournament and then sweat it out. Because at that point, they would have 2 Q1 wins, and one of them would be at Duke. And we don't know what Duke's NET is going to be by the time Selection Sunday comes. I think they would do themselves a lot of good by taking care of business at Syracuse, a team that they have played very well against. They do very well against that zone, and then beat Duke at home. If they do that, they get to 17 wins. They're 17-8 going to the ACC tournament. I think they'll be a lock.
So what would it mean for this game against Duke? What would a win mean for A, sweeping Duke, and B, potentially knocking Duke out of the NCAA tournament?
That hasn't been an issue in a long time as far as knocking them out of the tournament. I think, for our readers, I've tried to get this. This is what I tried doing a couple of weeks ago. I've got a little curved, and you'll understand why. I went on there and doing these NET reports saying, look, you guys should want Duke to win games. Because at that time, Duke was floundering between 73 and 77. So one day it's a Q1 win. The next day it's not a Q1 win. It's a Q2 win. I said, you want this team to get in. The way they're wobbling all over the place, they need Q1 wins, period. So you should want Duke to win games. And I got pulverized by a few people. We're not going to root. And now I'm trying to tell them to root for Kentucky. Because Kentucky's 64, and if they can win a few SEC games, they could get in the top 50. That's another Q1 win. So I think beating Duke and keeping them out of the tournament would be unbelievable to the Carolina fans, to our readers. For me, look at this basketball team. It's a game they should win, and that's kind of the way I view it. I think they're better than Duke. I think they have better parts. I think that they're deeper, and they should be really strong inside against Duke. I don't think Duke can match them inside. So they should be really good that day. That's a game they should win, by 8 points, 10 points, be comfortable with a minute left. But having covered all this team's games, there's nothing that would lead me to believe that that's a lock.
Looking ahead to that game for a moment, Matthew Hurt's been just on fire for Duke lately. Yeah. Does UNC have anyone that can stop him?
They did in the first matchup, and I know he had foul trouble and only played 21 minutes, I think, and he was sort of in and out. But he didn't get into foul trouble until midway through the first half, and he had one shot. So they kept him from getting touches. That's the way once he gets the ball, you can't stop him. He's the one guy, he and Champagny from Pittsburgh are two guys that they can create their own shot without using the dribble. And Matthew Hurt is phenomenal. What he did against Louisville was outstanding. He's just a guy that I don't know if Duke's getting him the ball where he needs it, I don't think anybody in the league can stop him. You can maybe slow him, but Carolina kept him from getting the ball. He ended up only attempting 6 shots, I think, in that game. So they would have to do the same, exercise the same formula. Don't let Hurt touch the ball. And if you don't, you got a good chance of beating Duke, because they're in a situation too where K has no idea who's going to flare up from one game to the next. And if you take Hurt out of the equation or minimize his effectiveness, Duke's a very beatable team, as we've seen.
So the win against Florida State was the 900th win in Roy Williams' career, and I believe he's the quickest to that, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I feel like he doesn't get talked necessarily in the same level of, say, a Mike Krzyzewski or some of these great. Is it possible to say that Roy Williams is a little bit underrated as a coach?
I would say so. I covered Duke for 13 years, and Krzyzewski is incredible. He would roll out a team every year that looked a little bit different from the year before, sometimes with a lot of the same personnel. And that was the thing that impressed me so much covering him up close. People say Roy's stubborn, he doesn't make adjustments. Well, that's not true. He's played small, stretch forward. PJ Harrison was a 4 1 year. And he's 6'5", with, standing on thick-soled shoes. He's probably 6'5". He had success with Luke May. Garrison, actually, the 2018 team, the second half of the year, Luke May was essentially the 5. So Roy has been able to coach different styles, different approaches. That 2016 I mentioned earlier, when Andrew was a freshman, Roy called set plays constantly. One of the things that North Carolina is known for is that when they reset, they don't look to the bench and get something from the coach. They already know what to do. So much read and react what they do in their motion. Everything is read and react. That year, he called a ton of set plays, and with that group that had like 8 points back from the national championship team, they got a 4 seed and they won 24 games. I think that was probably his best coaching job. But yeah, I do think he's probably underrated. Part of it's because he succeeded Dean Smith, and the people who are on my site and read our work swear by Dean Smith, and nobody can be better than Dean Smith, not even Roy, even though he's got more titles, even though his teams, other than the last couple of years, I think his teams at times have been more dynamic. And I know it's kind of hard to say. People might think, wow, you would say that with the Michael Jordan era. Well, the Michael Jordan era was a different era. It was pre-shot clock and all that kind of stuff. Roy's teams are fast. They're the fastest teams I've covered, the fastest teams I've seen in person. He'll tell you that he's not innovative, but he's a really good copycat. And I think he's taken some of the Dean Smith principles and he's made them a little bit better. He's sped them up. There is no team in college basketball that scores on a fast break after another team's basket like North Carolina, especially when they're older and have the right kind of point guard and the way that they pitch the thing ahead. There are things that they do that you don't see other teams do on a regular basis. Jim, you talked about the rebounding earlier, the offensive rebounding. How many teams are great at rebounding, but are also faster than their opponents getting up the court? Carolina, they're excellent at that secondary break with the bigs. Walker Kessler, look at the highlights Saturday. The big getting down the court, making himself available for the pitch ahead and a dunk is a Carolina trait, and it's a Roy Williams trait. And there are very few teams that I've ever seen covering college basketball for 25 years that come close to doing it with the regularity that North Carolina does. And I think that Roy is a grinder. He's a tough SOB. And his teams usually have that kind of mentality in March. And sometimes Dean's teams maybe didn't have that. They used to be called the IBM of college basketball. Maybe they were too businesslike, and every game was the same. They didn't really sense that moment sometimes. It's not my opinion. I'm just telling you what a lot of other people said. Roy's teams do. I think that they have a little bit of an edge. They have a little screw you in them, and they combine that screw you with talent and the athleticism, and then that will to go after that ball in the glass like few other teams do. So, yeah, I would say that qualifies him as a great coach. And 900 wins coaching in the Big 12 and the ACC is pretty impressive. He's beaten a lot of top-ranked teams before. He goes on the road and plays people. And I'm not trying to sell Roy Williams here, but having covered them, it's interesting because I go a lot of cool places. I went to Gonzaga last year. And who else goes to Gonzaga to play them in there? Somebody might play them in Seattle or Portland. They went to the dog pound and played them. Roy does that. He'll take a few early season losses because he sees the residual effect down the road. And that's one of the other things that I appreciate about him as a coach.
He is Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to make one point. Sorry, Jim. That's the thing about Roy Williams that I've always respected is the way he schedules. Even though they lost that game against Marquette, I don't know if there are any other coaches out there that would have taken that game just because they don't want to take a risk with that L because there was really nothing to really gain for it. But he looks at it as another opportunity for a really young team to get another game of experience and is kind of playing the long game in this instance.
Well, example, Houston a couple weeks ago played some school called Our Lady
of the Lake. Yep.
An NAIA school. But do you know who called them and asked to play? Gonzaga. And Kelvin Sampson wouldn't play him. Now, he's in the AAC. You'd think he would want to have an opportunity to play a really good team. They play some decent teams in that league, but they don't play a great schedule that's going to get them ready for March. He said, nah, we're going to play these guys. And they beat them by like 80 or something like that. Who else is scheduling these games right now? I mean, Northeastern wasn't exactly a cupcake. Northeastern beat UMass. They lost to Syracuse on the road by 6. In fact, when I was doing my prep for that game, what was interesting is Northeastern played at Georgia, at Syracuse, and at West Virginia, and held them all below their season scoring averages. Roy knew that, and they have a point guard, by the way, he's dynamite. The kid could play, start in the ACC just about everywhere. That's a solid team. And a lot of coaches will go out and play somebody in the 250s or 300s. And Roy even said, I'm not playing those guys. We're going to schedule somebody. We're going to get better. So you got to appreciate that. It bit him in the rear last week because Marquette is not a terrible team. Dawson Garcia is a really good player. And Wojo certainly knows what Carolina does. It's not like Roy has changed too much of what they do since he was working for K. So they certainly had a plan. And they played better in Carolina and beat them. But, you know, a lot of people, somebody actually asked Roy after the game, the press conference, do you regret scheduling Marquette? And Roy kind of lit him up a little bit, and that was the end of that press conference. Because they still got something out of it, even in defeat. I think that they learned something that's going to carry with them and will make them better down the road.
Nice thing about that is not only do the players learn, coaches learn.
Yeah.
I mean, Will got me before I could jump in because I was going to say the same thing. It's a big picture thing. If you're looking long-term, big picture, then yes, these things do pay off. Hey,
Jim, those coaches that there are a lot of teams out there that you see them in November, early December, and the coaches are coaching to win that game. And what they do that night is what they're still trying to do in late February. They don't really evolve. But there are guys like Kay, guys like Roy, guys like Izzo. And Izzo is a lot like Roy, where he'll go play anybody anywhere. He'll take some lumps early in the season because he knows his team will benefit from it. They want to see they want to get every bit of intel about their team before they get into league play. And sometimes they'll roll a lineup out there. People are like, why has he got those guys on the floor? He's trying to figure out if they can play. He's trying to figure out what kind of symmetry they have together, because that will come in handy down the road the rest of the season. Because teams do change during the course of the year. They all get better for the most part. So you want your team to get better at a more rapid rate, and you want to change enough that you're always kind of fresh and evolving in that respect. And that's what you see from guys like Michigan State until this weekend. They were doing the same thing. That's why those teams usually get better. And North Carolina typically plays its best basketball starting in February because Roy starts to trim the rotation. He's got everything kind of figured out. He knows what he's got. And he starts rolling out there, doing the things that he knows his team can do well.
It's all about evolving, man. You hit that on the head. Let me back up because earlier we talked about the impact of recruiting. And do you see that changing now? Do you see that they're coming out of that cloud? Yeah. Looks good.
The freshman class, they were the number 2 class in the country. And even before that, the year before, 2 years before that, they had Kobe White and Nasir Little, who were both McDonald's All-Americans. So, yeah, it's changing. I think Roy is probably wrestling a little bit with the idea of how many one-and-done type guys do you go after and how many guys in the 40s, 60s, and 80s who will be there for 3 or 4 years do you go after? Because he was even talking about this Friday, I think it was, where he said, look, all coaches want to be old. They want to get old. The problem is, and what's the challenge, is staying old. And those 16 and 17 teams were old. And then even when a lot of those guys left after they won the title, you still had May, you still had Barry, you still had Theo Pinson, you had Cam Johnson coming in from Pitt, who was an experienced older guy. So they were able to stay old for a couple more years. They weren't last year. The older guys they had were dudes that were sort of in the 80s and 90s in the rankings, and they're not old this year. So he might think, wow, some of these guys we got, Sharp may go pro after 1 year, Love may go pro after 2 years, but if he can keep 3 of those guys around, in a couple of years, they're going to be old again. And I think Roy is most comfortable with older teams because he likes to push his teams really hard, and it's easier to push a group that understands that it's not personal, it's just coaching. He's just doing what he's supposed to do to get you guys better. And that's an easier message to get across with an older team than it is with a younger team.
I'll take you out of basketball arena here for just a few moments, and let's briefly talk about football because
Sure.
This was a great turnaround season again for Mac Brown. And I can't see anything but bright skies, bright Carolina blue skies ahead. This team looks like it is, and I think there's some discounting of what's coming up next season, but I think that's a mistake based upon what I'm seeing early. Tell me what you see.
Well, I clearly they're headed in the right direction, and it's the whole of the program. It's not just, hey, they've got Sam Howell, they got to strike now while they got him. Their recruiting is outstanding. The message that they have is outstanding. They're not throwing a huge net out there trying to offer 250, 300 kids in a class, hoping they can get 20 or 25 to say yes that are really good. They got a very small net. They know who they want. They know who fits into what the style that they want to play. And they're going head to head with guys who are looking at Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Penn State. That's who they see themselves as now. Now, they haven't been down on the field yet. They had their flare-ups too. We're talking about flare-ups earlier. They had their flare-ups, certainly Miami. And then they had some games like Florida State where they were the other side. They're kind of learning how to be that program. That's how they envision themselves. It's quite ambitious to think that North Carolina can get to that point and then stay at that point. But I do think that when you look at the infrastructure of the program, it has not been in better shape since Mac was there the last time. And my first year was the 96. That was when I first started covering college sports. So that was his next to last year, and I covered his last season in Chapel Hill. And I don't recall understanding the program then the way I understand it now. So it's hard to compare other than on the surface stuff. But they have everything going in the right direction. The question is, will they ever be able to accumulate enough linemen to be the kind of team that can beat Notre Dame the day after Thanksgiving like this past year? They weren't good enough in the trenches. That's why they lost that game. Will they ever have enough skill talent where if they lose a running back, or this year they lost 2, do they have guys who are just ready to roll in next year? We don't know that. And I think that's the biggest question moving forward with this team is, for that air raid offense to work, you got to run the ball pretty well. You can't just throw it 45, 50 times a game. That doesn't work. If you want to beat the big boys and you want to have a seat at the biggest table in college football, you got to be able to run the ball, and you got to be able to run it in the red zone. They didn't run it well in the red zone Mac's first year. They did this past year, but those 2 guys are gone. Now, they do have the offensive line back, and they brought in a grad transfer from Tennessee, a kid named Ty Chandler, and they got young guys. But you don't know what you got with young guys until you roll them out there. And their best young guy was injured and didn't play in the bowl game, so they haven't even seen him in action. The good thing about losing those guys for the bowl game, they got a chance to see what they had against a club like A&M. And I think that's why they went out and got a grad transfer, because I'm not sure they were thrilled with the prospects of that running back room without going out and bringing somebody in.
Well, we talked about the success of the offense, but defensively, I thought the smartest move Mac Brown made was hiring Jay Bateman as a defensive coordinator. Now, obviously, before he came in, they were not very good defensively, but we're seeing, it was pretty darn offensive how bad that defense was. But we've seen the improvement in the 2 years as he's been the defensive coordinator. Do we see that trend continuing this season?
Yeah, and the main thing is that Bateman's defense isn't the kind of thing that you learn in the spring or you learn in August and then everyone's got it. It's quite intricate and it takes time. And I think what helps them is that the guy who calls the guy who's sort of the communicator on defense, Jeremiah Gibble, incredibly smart dude. We joke, some of us in the media joke that Well, it wouldn't be surprised that in 15 years we're interviewing Jeremiah as an offensive coordinator somewhere. He's that kind of smart. He sees the game in that kind of way. So if you have a guy out there like that who totally gets Bateman's, different approach, that's huge because he can relate it to the other kids and he can be the enforcer out there. Now, if you don't have guys up front, it doesn't really matter what your scheme is. And I think that was the issue 2 years ago. And this past year, they were a little bit better and they got better during the course of the year. But their mission has been to go out and get guys that can play up front, put a hand on the ground, stop those gaps, bounce that stuff outside, apply a traditional pass rush without having to blitz so much. Because Bateman, he'll blitz a lot, but coordinators would rather show that they want you to think it's coming and be so concerned thinking that dude's coming, but he doesn't come. And then somebody gets you from the other side. So you can do that if you have a front that can give you some push. They went out and brought in some big-time kids that are enrolled now as true freshmen, but you can't count on true freshmen in college football at the line of scrimmage. You got to wait a year or two for those guys to really pay off. Sometimes they can help you 15 or 20 snaps a game, but that's probably usually the extent. There are very few. Clemson's had a couple in recent years that can give you a lot as true freshmen. I don't anticipate these kids will. So I still think the offensive line is going to be a little bit of an issue as they continue to grow in this program. And so I've told you two things now. Question about the run game and the defensive line. And you need to be really sound in those areas to reach the kind of goals that they have. They're really good everywhere else, but I'm not sure they're really good yet in those two areas. We'll find out next fall. And if they are really good, then they have a chance to win a lot of games and play games in November that mean a lot.
When you look at the rest of the Coastal Division, you see Miami. They're going to be, De'Aaron King's not going to be himself as much as people want to think he is. It's going to be really hard to come back from a torn ACL, and it is very gutting. A lot of questions with a lot of the other schools. Virginia Tech has questions all over the place. They have a coach on the hot seat. Virginia loses a lot of its best defensive players. Pitt has got loses a lot. Do you see UNC as the favorite still in the Coastal?
Oh yeah. Yeah, and even if De'Aaron King is healthy, and I hope he is, he's a magnificent talent. I've seen so many kids get hurt doing this job for 25 years that it's painful, especially when so many people are giving Carolina players crap for not playing the bowl game. And then you got a guy who goes in a bowl game and he gets hurt, and people say, see what can happen in what is essentially an exhibition game. I hope he's healthy because I think Miami could be a tremendous challenge. I think the two of them could sort of step out in front of the division and make the Coastal Division not the joke that it's been. The ESPN for years had that Wheel of Coastal Division thing, whatever they do, kind of mocking the division because they had a different winner every year and you kind of never knew from week to week what's going to happen. Carolina and Miami would be pretty cool if that became a little bit of a rivalry because it would give that division a lot of substance and it would mean that you're guaranteed to have a big game in your division every year. And if North Carolina is to achieve at succeeding on its mission, you got to have big games. You got to be able to beat clubs that are top 10, top 15, top 20. So they need someone in that division. If they're going to make that push, they need someone to make that push with them. I think it'll make them better. It'll make the season more interesting, and it'll give them always at least one game like that on the schedule. That's huge and will generate a lot of national attention.
Chow time.
By the way, I think Pitt has a chance to be pretty good.
Okay. We're going to come back and visit that one during the season. Okay.
Although Narduzzi, I'm glad I don't cover him. I'll say that on the
yeah.
I understand.
I think that's
not exactly the
right there.
Yeah.
Not
exactly the best to deal with from what I've heard. Yeah. So totally understand.
All right. Let's talk about food. This is something that we do with everybody who comes to visit us because everybody that visits is going out and covering a lot of different sports and going to a lot of different venues and they have foods that they like, dislike, restaurants that they like and don't like, desserts, you name it. So you have spent a lot of time on the road, as you indicated earlier. First of all, tell us what some of your favorite foods are, and then we'll go from there.
I'm kind of a low carb guy.
Okay.
So if I eat carbs, it kind of messes up everything. So I try to stick with low carb. I don't really eat much on the road. I don't like to eat much on game days. You ask anybody who knows me locally in the media, they got all these, they don't have them this year, but pre-pandemic time, a lot of food everywhere you go, the media meals. I rarely ever eat the media meals.
Yeah.
Because I like to eat maybe 5 or 6 hours before a game. I eat a small meal and that's that. I don't want to, I want to be, to me, it's like game mode, my own personal game mode. So I don't really make food my priority when I'm on the road. I make what I get to see. Rest is what is important. A lot of times I fly in places the day of a game. And I try to get there early enough. I can take a power nap, that kind of stuff. But if I do eat something, if I do make sure I have something, maybe a little bit of peanut butter with a low carb pita, that sort of give me some energy. Some grilled chicken. I had chicken in Miami back in January, and I ended up having an allergic reaction before the game in Coral Gables, and I had to get a couple of antihistamines from Carolina's trainer. Otherwise, I was going to have to go to the hospital. So I do not recommend the what the heck is it called? The chicken and the peppers and all that stuff. Mexican food in Coral Gables, in downtown not Coral Gables, but in Coconut Grove.
Okay.
Don't eat that in Coconut Grove because it gave me an allergic reaction.
We won't
But
say
my
where.
favorite thing, to be honest with you, any games in Florida, I get early enough and I go for a walk. I try to get near the water and see the water so I can get some peace. And so that's more important to me than the food. Food is just a minor thing. If I can get a meal 6 hours before tip-off or kickoff, I'm good.
You're all good with food for thought.
There you go.
Something along those lines.
I'll accept that.
All right. So if I were to pin you down on a favorite restaurant that you've been able to go to, let's say pre-pandemic, right?
Okay.
Someplace that you've been to, maybe local, or on the road, doesn't make it, or both.
Okay. How about Primanti Brothers in Pittsburgh?
Okay.
But I don't eat the fries on the sandwich. I pull them off. And I don't eat much of the bread, but everything else in there is fantastic. And they have one, a 5-minute walk from Peterson Event Center, where they play hoops at Pitt. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you that one.
Okay. That's a good one. Now, since you're going low on the carb, obviously, desserts, do you do desserts?
Peanut butter pita.
Peanut butter
low carb pita. And I bring my own pitas, and I bring my own little peanut butter packs, stick them in my suitcase, and just to make sure I know that I have it.
Okay.
That's how little I actually eat on the road.
All right. That works. Whatever works best. Now I want to ask you something, because I have a specific type of wrap that I use, because I don't eat a lot of carbs myself. And it's spinach and some other stuff that they've put together. Anyway, it works really well. And also peanut butter. I might throw a little bit of honey or whatever in there on top of that, just for taste. But any particular type of pita that you are a fan of? And then what type of peanut butter? Is it smooth or is it crunchy?
Yeah, extra crunchy.
Extra
crunchy. Except you can't buy extra crunchy in those little.
It's because it won't come out, man.
It's all smooth, and then it's too sweet. So
yeah,
even that's not even optimal.
Yeah.
So I would prefer, if I drive, I take a little jar of peanut butter with me.
I got you. And
if I fly, you can't, because you can't have anything that big on the plane. So
all right. So now here's a question that I'm going to ask it only because one of our colleagues is asking that we ask this question. And because you say that you don't eat carbs, I'm assuming you're not much of a pizza fan.
Well, I mean, I'm a fan, but if I eat it, my head will explode. So,
okay.
I joke with my wife. I call it, I eat the roof. I scrape stuff off and I eat what's on the top. But even that sometimes is, a little goes a long way.
Yeah. Well, see, here's the question. It's with or without pineapple?
Oh, God, no way. You gotta be kidding me.
Yeah.
My brother did that like in 1986, and I think I got sick, and I've tasted it ever since. It was brutal. He had like ham and pineapple on a pizza. I'm like, that's not a pizza.
Say, finally, someone who's on my side.
Yeah, brutal. I'm pretty traditional when it comes to that stuff.
We have a lot of mixed bag answers on that. on that one, but it's an essential. So I'll just remember the next time that if I'm going to start searching for crunchy, extra crunchy peanut butter in a tube. And if I find it, next time I'm down your way, if you get a knock or something or a call, and it's me. So
and next time I'm thinking you're the one that likes pineapples on your pizza.
I'm okay with it. I don't have an issue with it one way or the other. It's not something I'm going to order.
The next time I see pineapples, I'm going to think about them. My daughter eats little pineapples from a little can thing every once in a while. So next time I see her eating them, I'm just going to think about how those should be outlawed from being on pizza.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm spoiled with pineapple. I love pineapple, but I'm spoiled because I spent time in Hawaii, and when you get it fresh, there's nothing like it. And I could eat that until, well, whatever happens, and we know what happens when you eat too much. So there, the end of,
go there.
into the food questions. Our special guest, the publisher of Tar Heel Illustrated, Andrew Jones. Thank you, sir, for joining us and having a great conversation, sharing some great information about the Tar Heels and some interesting takes on food as well.
Well, it's people who know me know that food is not a conversation I probably am one to have with, because they think I'm bizarre with what I eat. So Red Friedlander and a few others who have traveled with me, they don't get it. But they're at least used to it and they accept it now. So that's cool. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Send good thoughts to the Commonwealth of Virginia, my home state. So if I'm there sometime, maybe I'll stop by and see you. And I've only been to Minnesota in the airport a few times. I still count that as being in Minnesota because it's really, really cool to fly into.
Want more ACC sports news and interviews? Make ACCNation.net your homepage or follow us on Google News. Be sure to subscribe to ACC Nation on your favorite podcast or streaming radio platform. While you're there, we'd appreciate a rating and your support through PayPal. Follow us on social media at ACC Nation. And you'll find Will on Twitter at WillsWorldMN, and I'm at ACC The Q. Until next time, cheers.
Score.